Hello, my rotten friends. So I'm going to do some raw reading. I had mentioned this book before for our 13 Days to Independence. And so I'm just going to read a few chapters until I get tired of reading, and then I'll come back with more later. So this is the book, The Signers. The 56 stories behind the Declaration of Independence. I would like to say that I believe you can find this actually read on YouTube as an audiobook. So if you prefer someone else to read it, you may go look for it there. This is one I checked out at the library. So I put the cover up there. You can see it's by Dennis Brendel Fradden. Illustrations are by Michael McCurdy, and it was in the children's section of the library. It's for ages 10 and up, so it's geared towards the children. And let's read what it says here in the jacket. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For more than 225 years, men and women the world over have inspired the risk, have been inspired to risk everything in pursuit of the ideals embodied in these words. When they first appeared in our nation's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, they were a call to action for a colony at the point of rebellion. The 56 men who dared to sign their name to this revolutionary document knew that they were putting their reputations, their fortunes, and their very lives on the line by boldly and publicly declaring their support for liberty and freedom. As Benjamin Franklin said as he signed his name, we must all hang together. And most assuredly, we shall all hang separately." Who were these men? Who are the first heroes of our nation? The award-winning team of author Dennis Brendel Fradden and illustrator Michael McCurdy brings its considerable talent to the fore to illuminate the lives of these valiant men whose dauntless example gave thousands of colonists the courage to risk all for freedom. The Signers. Okay. This book was originally wrote 2002. So we're coming up, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on the 250, something like that year. So let's go. The introduction. Before I do, let me just check something. I thought so. Okay, there we go. All right. I had not made this public. It is now. So if anyone comes in now, you missed the beginning. Okay. Introduction. Americans celebrate Independence Day each July 4th because of a document that was adopted on July 4th, 1776. And this paper, which announced that the 13 colonies had separated from England and become the United States of America, has been called the nation's birth certificate. That's very interesting. Upon hearing about it, George Washington said that he hoped the document would inspire his troops to win the war for independence against England. The paper's stirring words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," have inspired Americans in war and in peace for nearly 2.5 centuries. This document, of course, is the Declaration of Independence. Its roots go back to the 1760s and early 1770s, when England taxed the 13 colonies on tea and other items. In 1774, American leaders gathered in Philadelphia at what was called the First Continental Congress to discuss their grievances. The troubles grew worse. In April of 1775, war between the 13 colonies and England erupted at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. A month later, American leaders met again in Philadelphia. When the Second Continental Congress opened in Philadelphia in May 1775, most Americans still hoped that peace would soon be made and that the 13 colonies would return to British rule. But the war escalated, and by the spring of 1776, growing numbers of Americans were considering independence. By then, it had become clear that taxes weren't the only issue. Having lived for generations 3,000 miles from England, Americans had begun to feel like separate people. On June 7th of 1776, Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, arose in Congress and read a proposal. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. Many of the delegates were thunderstruck by Lee's proposal. They had discussed separating from England in private, but hearing the word independent state formally presented in Congress was startling. Besides, declaring independence would be the easy part. Actually, winning it from the world's most powerful country might be close to impossible. Wanting a few weeks to ponder, Henry Lee's independence proposal, the congressmen delayed the vote on it until early July. Should the vote come out for separation from England, they realized they would need a paper explaining their actions. A 5-man committee composed of John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert R. Livingston of New York, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, was asked to produce a paper explaining why America was declaring independence. The committee entrusted the writing to Jefferson. The tall, red-headed Virginian wrote the Declaration in about 2 weeks in his Philadelphia lodgings. Not his home, but his lodgings. Jefferson showed the paper to Franklin and Adams, who made a few changes. For example, Franklin improved Jefferson's phrase, "We hold these truths to be sacred and unalienable," to "We hold these truths to be self-evident." The declaration would only be needed if the independence measure passed. Each colony had formed a wartime government that had sent delegates to Congress. If a colony had 5 delegates in Congress, 3 had to vote for independence for that colony to choose separation from England. 7 colonies out of the 13, that's a majority, had a vote for independence for the proposal to be approved. Thomas Jefferson estimated that as of June 1776, 6 colonies were not yet ready for independence. If just one pro-independence colony changed its vote, the measure would be defeated. But the men who favored independence knew that having 7 or even 12 colonies vote for separation from England wouldn't be enough. For how could a new nation survive with 1 or more colonies still loyal to England? Unless the vote was unanimous, the colonies could wind up fighting each other. On July 1st, the day before the official vote, Congress debated the issue and took a trial vote. The results showed movement towards independence, with 9 colonies now favoring the measure. South Carolina and Pennsylvania were opposed. Delaware was stuck in a tie with 1 delegate for independence, 1 against, and its 3rd delegate, independence man Caesar Rodney, 80 miles away in Delaware. New York's delegates had been instructed by their leaders back home not to vote one way or the other on independence. An amazing series of events occurred over the next 24 hours. Informed by a messenger that he was desperately needed in Philadelphia, Caesar Rodney mounted a horse and headed to the city. Meanwhile, Samuel Adams of Massachusetts and a few other independence men convinced some delegates who were undecided or opposed that all the colonies must stand together. When the official vote was made late on July 2nd, everything fell into place. Two Pennsylvanians who opposed independence, John Dickinson and Robert Morris, abstained from voting. This allowed Pennsylvania to squeak by for independence with the slimmest of margins, 3 votes to 2. Wet and exhausted from his all-night ride, Caesar Rodney arrived just in time to swing Delaware's vote to independence. Not wanting theirs to be the only colony against the measure, the South Carolinians switched to independence. And although its delegates did not vote on July 2nd, New York made the independence votes unanimous several days later. The July 2nd vote transformed the American colonies into the United States of America. And the delegates expected that July 2nd would be honored as the new nation's birthday. John Adams wrote his wife Abigail that he believed Americans would celebrate each July 2nd as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, bells, bonfires from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore. And Walmart can sell us more flags. But what happened was that after making more changes, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. Copies of the Declaration were sent to the 13 states, as the former colonies were now known. American patriots loved the Declaration. And because at the top of this document it said that the Declaration had been approved on July 4th, 1776, Americans began thinking of July 4th instead of July 2nd as the nation's birthday. This misconception about the day the United States was born has continued to present time. Another widespread misconception is that all the congressmen signed the Declaration on July 4th, 1776. Most historians think that only John Hancock and Charles Thompson, the president and secretary of Congress, signed that day. Oh, that's interesting. It appeared that the full Congress did not sign a copy of the document until later. Most of the delegates signed this copy on August 2nd, 1776, and others signed even later. On January 18th of 1777, Mary Catherine Goddard, editor and publisher of the Maryland Journal and Baltimore Advertiser, I'm guessing, became the first person to publish the full declaration, including all the signers' names. The fact that this declaration was approved on July 4th, but not signed by most members of Congress until about a month later, meant that those who voted for independence were not the identical group of the men who signed the document. About a quarter of the 56 signers had not been in Congress at the time of the vote. For example, Richard Henry Lee was called back to Virginia in mid-June of 1776, and as a result, Lee missed the vote for his own independence proposal. But he returned to Congress in late August and signed the Declaration. That's interesting, that they have to be present at that particular vote, which means, I don't know, that seems like I could manipulate that. Not necessarily here, but just in general. Now, I'm just thinking of the way the government works, and, they're going to put a vote, and then, they show like the room, and there's not even anybody there. Like they're all back at their home states or something. Does that mean that they're just not voted? Things I don't really understand yet. The signers of the Declaration, rather than those who voted for independence, have long been honored by the nation's founders. That is because by placing their names on the Declaration, they announced to the world their willingness to risk everything for the cause of independence. The British targeted the 56 signers for special punishment. I bet they did. The homes of 12 signers were burned, and nearly 20 of them lost much of what they owned. According to some estimates, 9 signers died as a result of hardships they suffered during the Revolution. Yet not one signer changed his stance on independence. All of them kept the promise that they had made in the Declaration of Independence that they would stake their quote lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, end quote, on the country's cause. And it has a little footnote here. This is the end of the introduction. It says, note, the exact order in which the declaration was signed is not known. The order in which the signers are presented in this book reflects both the history of the revolution of the signers' relationships to one another. For example, Massachusetts is presented first because it was the site of major events leading to the revolution. Within the Virginia chapter, George Wythe precedes Thomas Jefferson because he was that future president's teacher. Okay. So in other words, this does not necessarily have an order. So let's say hi to my friends. Hewlett came in, number one. Hello. Yay, you did get it. And Suzanne is here. You're number two, second place. Go girl. Frankie is here. That's number three. And so far, you're the only three that want to say hi. Okay, so now I am raw reading this, which means I've not read it yet. I will mispronounce things. I have to clear my throat. I am going to do things wrong here, but I will do my very best. And we'll get right into it. I'm just going to read until I get tired. The chapters are not very long, so they're kind of short. So I figure maybe I get, 2 or 3. There's 56. And again, this is a child's book, so it's for ages 10 and up. So we're going to start with Massachusetts. Just so you know, I love the state name of Massachusetts. What a great name. All right. So Massachusetts, the place where the Pilgrims settled, the site of America's oldest college, being Harvard, and the birthplace of Thanksgiving and America's public school system. Woo woo, Massachusetts had 250,000 people by 1775. That sounds paltry today, but back then, when all 13 colonies together had only about 2.5 million people, Massachusetts was the third most populous colony, trailing only Virginia and Pennsylvania. Boston, the Massachusetts capital, then as now, had about 16,000 people in the mid 1770s. That would make it only a small town today, but America's largest cities at the time were Philadelphia and New York. Massachusetts people worked at farming, fishing, shipbuilding, and in the towns, shopkeeping. Starting in the 1760s, Massachusetts became known as the most rebellious of the 13 colonies, and Samuel Adams of Boston was considered the most rebellious American. In 1770, 5 Americans, including a black man named Crispus Attucks, were killed in a street fight with British soldiers. Oh my God, this pattern just keeps repeating. Samuel Adams named this clash the Boston Massacre and used it to stir up hatred against the British. 3 years later, Samuel Adams organized the Boston Tea Party, and the revolution began. When the British tried to capture Samuel Adams and his friend John Hancock in Lexington, Massachusetts. I have read, doing this research for this 13 days, that Samuel Adams is given a lot of credit to this Boston Tea Party, and he may or may not really be attributed to a good portion of it. But we're going to keep reading. Besides Samuel Adams and John Hancock, Massachusetts' other signers were Samuel's cousin, John Adams, Robert Treat Paine, and Eldridge Gerry. Later, Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Gerry all served as governor of the Bay State. Paine was its first attorney general, and John Adams served as the second president of the country he had helped to create. And so it's got a little bit of facts here. It says Samuel Adams was born September 17th of 1722. He was 53 at signing. One of the things I like about them having these ages and stuff is because they were a nomadic generation. So they were already a rebellious generation. They were in the 100-year cycle at the crisis, and it shows in their age as they were all in their middle age. John Hancock, born January 2nd, 12th, 1737. He was 39. Oh, I see. So Samuel Adams was married to Elizabeth Checkley and Betsy Wells. They had 6 children. He died October 1st, 1803, and he was 81. John Hancock was born January 12th, 1737. He was 39 at the signing. He was married to Dolly Quincy. They had 2 children, and he died October 8th, 1793, at 56 years old. John Adams, born October 30th of 1735. He was 40 at the signing. His wife was Abigail Smith. They had 5 children, and he is one that died on July 4th, so on the independence of 1826, at 90 years old. Robert Treat Payne, March 11th, 1731. He was 45 at the signing. His wife was Sally Cobb, and they had 8 children. And he died May 11th of 1814 at 83. Eldridge Jerry, he was born July 17th, 1744. He was 32 at the signing. His wife was Ann Thompson. They had 10 children. And he died on November 23rd, 1814, at 70 years old. Note, children in quotations refers to the number of children each signer was known to have fathered by his wife or wives if married more than once. And then it's got a little picture here of, Massachusetts. It's just got New England. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 there. It doesn't go past. It's got Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And I'd like to say that they are not in, they're located, they don't look the same, these 13 colonies. They're not in the same shapes as they are now. So they were still new. So let's start with Samuel Adams. I see Charming has come in. Hello, Charming. I think that makes you number 5. And Kieran is here to take up the 6th spot. Excellent. So Samuel Adams, he is the father of American independence. And it's got his little signature there. More than anyone else, a Massachusetts man ignited America's rebellion against England. In fact, during the decade before the war began, Samuel Adams was basically a one-man revolution. He was born in Boston, 1722. Despite graduating from Harvard, Samuel failed at nearly everything he tried for many years. Must not have made too many brothers. He went to work at a Boston counting house, a business similar to a bank. Samuel lost his job because he spent his time talking politics. His father gave him a large sum of money to start any business he wanted, and Samuel passed along half of the money to a needy friend, and he somehow lost the other half. The bottom line was that all the money was gone soon. His father then put Samuel to work in the family brewery. Samuel neglected the business until it was eventually destroyed. Bostonians elected Samuel to the job of tax collector. Now, see, this is where it starts to get shady. This guy was a loser and couldn't handle his money, and they made him a tax collector. People who wanted to avoid paying their taxes could not have picked a better man. As he listened to his neighbors' tales of woe about their financial problems, he felt sorry for them and ended up collecting little of the money. So was that intentional or incompetence? Because if I was trying to hire a tax man, the last one I want to do, the last man I'm thinking to hire is somebody who is not good with money. I can't seem to hang on to it, to go around and collect money from people. And he seems to be a little bit of a loser and not real interested in things. So that seems like an odd job he was given, but okay. But it seems like, he was a good guy. He didn't, okay, well, I'll just take some of your money. Samuel had 6 children with his first wife, Elizabeth Checkley. After she died, he married Betsy Wells, with whom he didn't have any children. It was said that Samuel Adams was so poor that his family would have starved had not the rich merchant John Hancock helped to support them. There was one thing that no one could do as well as Samuel Adams. By the 17th, I just highly doubt that. I'm sorry. If he was so poor, he would have been living with the people he was collecting taxes with. And I doubt John Hancock would have been hanging out with him. When they say stuff like this, I don't know. I don't know what that means. Right. He was so poor he couldn't feed his children, and yet he's surrounded by rich people. Why is that? There was one thing that no one could do as well as Samuel Adams. By 1760s, he was the most outspoken critic of England. He and Patrick Henry of Virginia both argued in favor of independence by about 1765 and are considered the first Americans to do so. But while Patrick made speeches, Samuel wrote thousands of letters about British injustice, which he sent to newspapers and colonial leaders around the country. He signed the newspaper letters with dozens of false names. This gave readers the impression that all of Boston was up in arms, when really just Samuel was doing much of the complaining. Again, that just makes me think of what they're doing now. They make it look like, oh, everyone is transitioning when it's really just a few. It's just one. Samuel also recruited young men and turned them into revolutionaries. Paul Revere, Samuel's cousin John Adams, and John Hancock all considered Samuel their political father, as Revere expressed it. And in case you don't know, Paul Revere is supposedly the rider that came through town on the horse shouting, "The British are coming." But there's also a story that maybe he was drunk in a bar and the next in line did it. But I don't know. All three became more famous than other. The Redcoats are coming. Did I say British? The Redcoats are coming. All three became more famous than their political father. They were fine with Samuel Adams, who liked to remain in the shadows and let others receive the credit. Excuse me, a man after my own heart. I think I like Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams took part in some of the main events that sparked the revolution. He organized Boston's Sons of Liberty, a group of rebels who protested British injustice by destroying British property and picking fights with British officials. Dozens of towns throughout the 13 colonies formed Sons of Liberty organizations modeled after the famous group in Boston. After England passed a tax on tea, Samuel planned the Boston Tea Party and gave the signal for the tea to be destroyed. Again, I've read that possibly is not true. He also began the committees of correspondence, the letter writing networks through which colonial leaders kept in touch. The Committee of Correspondence. Okay. The British called Samuel Adams, quote, the Grand Incendiary, meaning someone who stirs up trouble, and, quote, the most dangerous man in Massachusetts. The revolution began when the British marched into Lexington, Massachusetts, in an attempt to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Fortunately, Paul Revere warned Adams and Hancock of the enemy's approach. The Redcoats are coming, allowing them to slip away. Or maybe it was the British. I can't remember. Somebody know how that famous line goes. That's something I learned in like second grade, so soon after the war began, the British offered to pardon all Americans who would, quote, lay down their arms and return to the duties of peaceable subjects. So British offered a pardon. So anybody that was involved in this, if you just stop fighting, we'll pardon you. Except for two, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Had Britain won the war, the pair probably would have been among the first Americans executed. But America triumphed, and a grateful nation called Samuel Adams, quote, the father of American independence, and, quote, the father of the revolution. Thomas Jefferson called him, quote, truly the man of the revolution. Later in life, Adams served as governor of the new state of Massachusetts from 1793 to 1797. Following his death, his deeds were largely forgotten, and he faded back into the shadows. He wouldn't have minded, for he often said that he worked not for personal glory, but so that, quote, millions yet unborn could enjoy independence. So, what do you think of our story so far? um, Back, boys, it's a blowjob. All right, so now I'm going to read John Hancock. He's got 3 pages. Here, John Hancock does. Put your John Hancock here. People who are about to sign important papers are often asked to, quote, put your John Hancock here. The first person to sign the Declaration of Independence inspired this expression. John Hancock was born in Braintree, Massachusetts in 1737. His father, a minister, died when John was 7. The family had more than grief to contend with. Their home was reserved for the new minister, so they had to move out to make room for the new preacher. John's mother couldn't afford to keep the family together. She and her other 2 children moved in with grandfather Hancock in Lexington, Massachusetts, while John went to live with his wealthy Uncle Thomas and Aunt Lydia Hancock in their mansion in Boston's Beacon Hill. That sounds very interesting. His aunt and uncle, who had no children of their own, showered John with love and everything that money could buy, including a Harvard education. John adored them too. But all his life, he was haunted by being separated from his mother, brother, and sister. Following college graduation, John went to work for Uncle Thomas. In 1764, Thomas Hancock died, leaving most of his fortune to his nephew. Suddenly, at 27, John Hancock was one of the richest people in Massachusetts. John enjoyed his wealth. He owned enough suits to open a clothing store, drove it about in a fancy carriage, and gave parties that were the talk of Boston. He also used his money for the public good, which made him very popular. For example, he helped rebuild damaged structures after a fire. And every winter, he donated food to poor Bostonarians. Samuel Adams decided to recruit Hancock for the Liberty Party, as the Radicals were called. He took Hancock to his political meetings and convinced him to join the Patriot cause. They were an odd couple, the odd couple. Adams in his threadbare suit, accompanied by the dashing young merchant. At Samuel's prodding, John ran for office, and in 1766, he was elected to the Massachusetts legislature. Hancock poured his heart, soul, and money into the Patriot cause. He gave so much money to the rebels that Bostonians joked, quote, Samuel Adams writes the letters to the newspaper and John Hancock pays the postage, end quote. Hancock was also the central figure in a famous act of defiance. In May of 1768, his ship Liberty entered Boston Harbor. A British tacksman climbed aboard to inspect the vessel. By Hancock's order, the crew locked him in a cabin. John Hancock was arrested by his lawyer, John Adams, managed to have the charges dropped. However, the British seized the Liberty and never returned it to him. So they locked the British taxman in the cabin, in his cabin. That's funny. In Hancock's cabin. That's funny. And they never returned it. They're like, fuck you. In 1774, how dare he lock me in? They manhandled me. I can just imagine what they were, the way they say that they talk like back then, it's fluffing off his suit. And 1774, he further enraged the British by making a speech in which he suggested that the colonists form an independent nation called the United States of America, one of the first times this name was proposed. As war approached, Hancock was elected president of new Massachusetts government, and that was the forerunner of its state government. Under Hancock, Massachusetts raised bands of, quote, Minutemen. And these soldiers who claimed they could get ready to fight in 60 seconds were soon needed. On the morning of it, the Minutemen is an interesting story in itself. If you ever want to look at it, if I don't manage to get to it, maybe I'll do it next year. Well, maybe we can do this 13 days every year, and I'll look at new things. But I remember the story of the Minutemen. Okay. On the morning of April 19th, 1775, British troops came to capture Hancock and Samuel Adams, who were hiding in Lexington. Thanks to Paul Revere's famous ride, there it is, Hancock and Adams were warned. A little known fact is that Samuel had a tough time convincing John to flee. Hancock wanted to join the Minutemen, who fought the Battle of Lexington on the village green, beginning the Revolutionary War. John Hancock and Samuel Adams soon headed to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. In May of 1775, Hancock was elected president of the Congress. 3 months later, Hancock married Dolly Quincy, with whom he would have 2 children. Their daughter Lydia lived less than a year. Their other child, John George Washington Hancock, hit his head while ice skating and died at the age of 8. Remember when we were talking about names? And his name is John George Washington Hancock, named after someone very interesting. Placement in time, a DNA of time. As president of the Congressional Congress, John Hancock was the first person to sign the Declaration of Independence. Reportedly, while signing in large, bold letters on July 4th of 1776, Hancock said, "There, John Bull," that was a nickname for England, "can read my name without spectacles and may double his reward of my head." And we've since learned that that's kind of just a myth and probably not the case. But it's fun, so we'll go with it. Hancock was immensely popular with the American patriots after signing the Declaration. This just goes to show you how one story told through the telephone of one author and 2 authors and 3 authors and this person and that person and this, we literally lose the truth and we're left with a fable or a fairy tale of facts. In 1780, he was elected the first state governor of Massachusetts in a landslide. He served as governor for a total of 11 years, but suffered so severely from painful disease called gout that at times he couldn't walk and had to be carried about Boston. He was still governor of the Bay State when he died in 1793 at the age of 56. Didn't we learn? I have it. I'm going to play it. I'd read it before. I'll either reread it or just replay it. Where we had these stories about exactly that, him being carried around. John Adams. Are you still here? Let's see. We're at 38 minutes. John Bull Smith or Shite? The original mafia, militia. Sorry, the Minutemen. Hello, Masshole. Happy to have you here. Excellent. Let's see. Wore these firstborn sacrificial desks? Just asking. I've been listening to the sound of death and sickness drew me in. Hello, Jerry. We're glad you're here. So John Adams, survive or perish with my country, he is said to have said. He's quoted to have said. 2 signers went up. Let me see how many pages this is. I just want to keep my time. Okay, we're good. He's only 2 pages. John Adams is only 2 pages. 2 signers went on to become president of the new nation. The first was John Adams of Massachusetts. Born in Braintree, which is today Quincy, near Boston in 1735, John graduated from Harvard. There's another Harvard. That makes 3, doesn't it? Then taught school for a year. Although he later claimed that he learned all he needed to know about human nature from his students, he was not fond of teaching, so he turned to the study of law. That goes hand in hand, human nature and law. Just after he became an attorney, he met Abigail Smith. He and, quote, Miss Adorable, as he called her. Oh, I want to be called Miss Adorable. That's a cute pet name. Were married in 1764. I believe I could live up to that title. The couple had 5 children and enjoyed a lifelong love affair that ended only with her death after 54 years of marriage. The many letters John and Abigail Adams exchanged when apart provided us with a vivid picture of revolutionary times. Like many other young men, cause. John was led to the patriot cause by his cousin Samuel Adams. In 1770, John was elected to the Massachusetts legislature, where he and Samuel spearheaded the fight against English oppression. John served in the Continental Congress from 1774 to 1777. One of the hardest working congressmen, he awoke at 4 each morning and kept going until 10 at night. By 1775, he believed that America must become independent. "The die is now cast," he wrote in a letter. "Sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish, with my country is my unalterable determination." Thanks partly to John's efforts, the new nation survived. And in Congress, he and his cousin were instrumental in appointing George Washington to command the Continental Army. As a member of the committee assigned to draft the Declaration, he convinced Thomas Jefferson to do the writing. Years later, Adams described his discussion with Jefferson about it. Thomas Jefferson. So I got T.A. for Thomas Jefferson, and I've got J.A. for John Adams. So the conversation goes like this. Tommy says, "You should do it." And John says, "Oh, no." And Tommy says, "Why will you not? You ought to do it." And John says, "I will not." And Tommy says, "Why?" And John says, "Reasons enough." And Tommy says, "What could be your reasons?" And John says, "Reason first, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business. Reason second, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can." And Tommy said, "Well, if you are decided, I will do as well as I can." How cute is that? That's how it went down. I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. I love that. That's fabulous. It's my favorite thing I've read. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin made a few minor changes to Jefferson's stirring document that called a new nation to arms. John Adams put his John Hancock on the Declaration right below his cousin Samuel's signature. Early in 1778, Congress sent John Adams to obtain help for America in France. And again, we had a lot of, their stance on France. France was very much involved. John and Abigail decided that their 10-year-old son, John Quincy Adams, should go too. John and John Quincy Adams were at sea when their ship engaged in a battle with a British vessel. John grabbed his musket and went out on deck with his young son. Suddenly, a cannonball slammed into the ship near where his father and son were standing. Had it struck a few feet away, it might have killed 2 future U.S. presidents. That's right. Following the Revolution, John Adams helped negotiate the peace treaty. He later served his country in many ways. In the first election for president in 1789, George Washington received the most votes, and John Adams came in second. By the method then used, Washington became president and Adams vice president. Then in 1796, John Adams was elected as the nation's second president, and he held the office from 1797 until 1801. Abigail didn't live long enough to see it, but John Adams was still alive when his son John Quincy Adams took office as the nation's 6th president in 1825. Until George and George W. Bush, John and John Quincy Adams were the only father and son to both hold the nation's highest office. And we should ask ourselves some questions there. Why did George and George Bush get the honors? Why did John and John Quincy get these honors? John Adams remained vigorous until his late 80s, walking 3 miles a day. By a remarkable coincidence, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day, that is July 4th of 1826, precisely 50 years after the adoption of exactly 50 years, the Declaration of Independence. And the last words uttered by the 90-year-old John Adams were, quote, Thomas Jefferson still survives. But unknown to Adams, the author of the Declaration of Independence had died a few hours earlier. I don't know that I believe that story either. He's dying and he says, Thomas Jefferson still, but no, he also had died only a few hours earlier. Maybe that was like some kind of, I don't know what we call it. Like, today they call that like some kind of, ghostly apparition or something. A synchronicity. Okay. So, I'm done with that one. Now I'm going on to Robert Treat Paine. Shall we keep going? He was no angel. It says Robert Treat Paine. He was no angel. So he wasn't a treat. He was more of a pain. Is that what you're saying? Bobby. Sometimes we forget that the signers were real people with flaws. Hello, Paul. I meant to say hi. Wait, before I start this, let me see what you guys are saying. John Bull was like a caricature of England, like the hand rubbing. He represents the arch controller these days. Hello, external explorations. Welcome. Good reading. Well, thank you. I do enjoy reading. Braintree is still Braintree. And Masshole, of course, by his name, you should guess he's in Massachusetts. It's the town you have to go to collect large state lottery prizes. Isn't that interesting? Go rob a moth. Oh, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to leave you to that. I'm going to learn that. I'm going to. After my 13 days of independence, I think I'm going to go, I'm going to start sharing. We're going to learn Gaelic or something in here. The story is like ours, Jerry, only ours was made up on a boat trip. Ha ha ha, as we know. I noticed that. Is that not the same story everywhere, over and over again? How you doing, Paul? Okay, that's you guys. It was great to have the few new voices on the live the other night. Yes, it was. Okay, excellent. And internal exploitations. You may be in here in another name, or I don't recognize you, but nonetheless, I'm raw reading, which means that I've not read this before. And so forgive any mistakes that I make. Okay, so now we're going to read Robert Treat Paine, who was no angel. Sometimes we forget that the signers were real people with flaws. When we do that, we should think of Robert Treat Paine. Bob, I knew it. Bob, as he was called, was born in Boston in 1731. He entered Harvard. That makes 4 Harvards at 14. I'm going to have to start a ticker. Hang on. I need a piece of paper. I got to write this. I'm tickering how many at Harvard. We've got 4 now. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, and unless I've forgotten, but I think that was 4. Oh, okay. He entered Harvard at 14, graduated at 18, and then taught school in the Massachusetts town of Lunenburg. Lunenburg. Paine soon discovered that he lacked the patience to teach. In a letter to his sister Abigail, he wrote, I began my school. Oh, how the students did hum and haw and whine and sing and everything else disagreeable. So Paine taught until he couldn't take it anymore for about a year, and then went to sea. Over the next few years, he sailed to such places as North Carolina, Spain, and the Azores, Azores, which is a group of islands belonging to Portugal. His final voyage in 1754 was a whaling trip to Greenland. Back home, Paine had to decide on a new career. From entries in his diary, we know that he sometimes got drunk and that he had what he called a stray heart, quote unquote, stray, stray heart, meaning that he had a number of romances. He finally settled on a legal career and became a lawyer in Taunton, Massachusetts. He married Sally Cobb, who was already pregnant with their first child in 1770. Bob and Sally would have a total of 8 children. Also in 1770, Paine took on a major case. The town of Boston hired him to prosecute the British soldiers accused of killing 5 Americans in the Boston Massacre. Although the soldiers were found not guilty or got off with life sentences, Paine made a name for himself among the patriots. In 1773, he was elected from Taunton to the Massachusetts legislature, and the next year he was sent to the Continental Congress. Some congressmen considered him difficult to work with. In fact, he was nicknamed, quote, the objection maker, because he seemed to oppose every measure that he didn't propose himself. Although not as eager for independence as Samuel or John Adams, Robert Treat Paine signed the Declaration with his scrawl, quote, his SCRAWL in quotes, as he called his terrible handwriting. From 1777 to 1790, Paine served as the first Attorney General of the state of Massachusetts. He then served as a judge for 14 years until he was too deaf to hear cases, becoming more conservative with age. One of his and Sally's children, Robert Treat Paine Jr., was a well-known poet who became involved in the theater and married an actress. In those days, some old-timers like Samuel Adams and Robert Treat Paine considered the theater harmful to the morals of Americans. Still is. Sadly, Robert Treat Paine, who hadn't been an angel himself when young, refused to have anything more to do with his son because of his marriage to the actress. Well, he's a dick. His son became an alcoholic and drifted into poverty. Only after many years did the father and son make up. The 37-year-old poet died in his parents' attic room in 1811, and Robert Treat Paine, the signer, died 3 years later at the age of 83. And that is his thing, a straying heart. Exactly. Okay, we're close to an hour. I've got Eldridge Jerry, and he's just 2 pages. So I'll let you guys, while I'm reading this, I'll let you decide if you want me to keep going or if you'd like me to end this and come back for another hour. So you guys can keep going or end it and come back and read another hour. Like, I'll turn around and come right back, but do we want to oh, I just got the notification for my own stream. How fabulous. So you guys decide, keep going, end it, come back. What are we wanting on our time frames here? Let's see. Oh, you guys have said a few things. Eli Weasel made up his stories about the 6 trillion on a 2-week boat trip to South America. That's interesting. I'm not sure I know that story. So we would love to know more. There is still a U.S. base on the Azores due to a military alliance between U.S. and Portugal under the NATO agreement. Excellent. I love that you're throwing that information out here. Yes, keep doing that. And I'm clean, baby. Ulick says the Azores, the Atlantic. Okay. His bad. And strike by okay. So 1 vote for keep going. All right. So Eldridge Jerry, and he says, this is cute. Fiery little marble leader. Oh, sorry, marble heater. Header. Header? Marble header? Marble. He was a fiery little marble header. I guess that's what that says. John Adams once wrote that if his fellow congressmen were all like Elbridge Gerry, quote, the liberties of America would be safe. Jerry was born in a seaside town. Jerry was born in a seaside town of Marblehead, Massachusetts. Okay, I see why it's called Marbleheader. Okay. I'll have to answer that here in a second. In 1744, he entered Harvard at 14. Holy shit, that gives me five Harvard heads. Very young by today's standards, but not unusual for the few colonists who attended college. To receive his master's degree from Harvard in 1765, Jerry had to present an argument on a subject. So 24-year-old Elbridge Gerry argued that Americans should resist the British Stamp Act, a tax on paper goods that had been passed that year. Jerry then returned home and joined his family's merchant business. In 1772, Marbleheaders, as people from his town were called, elected Jerry to the Massachusetts colonial legislature, where he met Samuel Adams. Seeing that Jerry had the patriotic spark, the, quote, grand incendiary took him under his wing and encouraged him to become even more rebellious. Go! The fiery little Marbleheader, who stuttered when speaking, became one of his colony's leading revolutionaries, among other things, helping to gather military supplies and distribute them to Massachusetts Minutemen. There is stories that Moses from the Bible had a stutter as well. I find that always interesting when you hear that kind of stuff. They get thrust in these supposedly very vocal positions. On the night of April 18th, 1775, Jerry attended a meeting of patriots in what is now Arlington, Massachusetts. Afterwards, he and two colleagues went to sleep in the town's Black Horse Tavern. During the night, they were awakened by the sound of British troops marching to what would be the opening battle of the Revolution at Lexington and Concord. To avoid capture, Jerry and his two friends ran outside and hid in a cornfield just before some soldiers entered the tavern to search it. The three men lay on the cold ground in the night clothes until the soldiers were gone. One of Jerry's companions became ill from exposure and soon died. A few months later, Jerry was elected to the Continental Congress, taking his seat in February of 1776. He became known as one of the boldest spokesmen for independence. Jerry signed the Declaration in September and forever after considered it the crowning achievement of his life. Elbridge Gerry remained a bachelor until the age of 41. And in 1786, he married Anne Thompson, who was 20 years younger than he. So she was 21. The couple, who settled in a mansion in Cambridge, Massachusetts, had 10 children. While serving as governor of Massachusetts from 1810 to 1812, Elbridge Gerry helped enact a law dividing the Bay State into political districts favorable to his own party, of course. This resulted in some odd-shaped districts. One district shaped like a salamander, someone said. Someone else joked that it looked more like a gerrymander, making a play on the governor's name. To this day, the practice of drawing boundary lines to favor a political party or a group is called a gerrymandering. In 1812, Elbridge Gerry was elected Vice President of the United States under President James Madison. Gerry was serving in the nation's second highest office when he died suddenly, perhaps of a heart attack, on November 23rd, 1814, in Washington, D.C. His widow was the last surviving wife of a signer to die. and Anne Jerry lived until 1849, and at 73 years after her husband's proudest moment when he signed the Declaration of Independence. And so that's, oh, well, that takes up all of Massachusetts. Excellent. So now part two is going to be Virginia. So I'm gonna just I'm gonna play something for a second so that I can get a drink and all that, and then we'll go for another hour. But let me see what you guys are saying up here. Leave it out. Right, heading out later. Okay, bye, Paul. And are you guys going somewhere today? Are you going to be live today? Did I hear that somewhere? It says that could be you. Like it would make sense. Just like they sent him to an overseas territory in the Pacific now for him to formally plead guilty to nominal charges. And we're saying bye to Paul. And the Stamp Act of 1765 is very interesting American history. This is what got people angry about. Okay, I'm going to write this down. So we'll go and look at that Stamp Act. I really like doing this 13 days of independence here because I'm learning, this is stuff I haven't even looked at since I was just a kid in school. And my understandings of these things are all very fairy tale nursery rhyme-esque. And so I have very much enjoyed going back and taking a look at these events as an adult and with what I already have learned about the world at large. And so when I'm listening to this, I'm seeing these similarities. It's as if, I don't know why we don't go back and look at these things when we get older. Loose ends are being tied up before the end of Obama's reign. Don't talk to me, Jerry. You stood me up. Oh, no. The Stamp Act as in postage stamps. Now, he says here, the stamps as in taxes and duties on the sale of a bill of good. I stamp it with my stamp of approval. Business, with or without representation, taxation makes everybody angry, including the tax collectors. The tax is not technically on goods, but on the administrative work done of putting an ink stamp on the bill lading or consignment from the ship. External, do you have like a link or a title or something that you could give me as a starting off point? Do you have something, an article, a book that you'd want me to read, a chapter? Now, I got to keep my books somewhat small. I'm not, I like children's books because they're easy to read, but I would love if you have something that oh, this is it. You've got to read this. Even if I just read one chapter or the intro, I can share it with everybody. Feel free to share that. I need to give you, and give me a second as I will be right back. I'm going to just do this here. We'll have an intro moment. Which one can I do? Which one should I do? Oh, I'll do this one.
Not believe your eyes if 10 million fireflies lit up the world as I fell asleep. 'Cause they fill the open air and leave teardrops everywhere. You'd think me rude, but I would just stand and stare. I'd like to make myself believe It's hard to say that I'd rather stay awake when I'm asleep, 'cause everything is never as it seems. 'Cause I get 1,000 hugs from 10,000 lightning bugs as they tried to teach me how to dance. A foxtrot above my head, a sock hop beneath my bed, a disco ball is just hanging by a thread. I like to make myself believe this planet Earth turns slowly. It's hard to say that I'd rather stay awake when I'm asleep, 'cause everything is never as it seems. Leave my door open just a crack, please take me away from here, 'cause I feel like such an insomniac. Please take me away from here. Why do I tire of counting sheep? Please take me away from here, when I'm far too tired to fall asleep. To 10 million fireflies, I'm weird 'cause I hate goodbyes. I got misty eyes as they said farewell, but I'll know where several are if my dreams get real bizarre, 'cause I saved a few and I keep them in a jar. I'd like to make myself believe that planet Earth turns slowly. It's hard to say that I'd rather stay awake when I'm asleep, 'cause everything is never as it seems. I'd like to make myself believe that planet Earth turns slowly. It's hard to say that I'd rather stay awake when I'm asleep, 'cause everything is never as it seems. I'd like to make myself believe that planet Earth turns slowly. It's hard to say that I'd rather stay awake when I'm asleep, because my dreams are bursting at the seams.
Here we are. Okay. AB, hello. It's so good to see you. And I gave everybody spanners now, so you can all sub to each other's channels and share links or other information that you find interesting. Okay. And just as a public announcement, Husinistic is live. I would understand if you wanted to go and listen to him. Of course, you're welcome to stay here. But if somebody would grab his link and at least throw it out there so that you can sub to his channel, as we are all fans. Okay. I just noticed that when I was pulling it up on my phone. I guess I should have grabbed it and thrown it in there, but it's too late now. I'm already here. I've already put that down. Okay. So now we did Massachusetts. So now we're going into Virginia. And so we will keep reading. So it looks like it's going to give us information about the state, and then it's going to give me the people that were from the state. So that's what we will go through. And what comes after Virginia? Oh, Virginia is quite large. Oh, Virginia is very large. Pennsylvania. All right, so we'll do Virginia. And so I'll just read till we get through Virginia. So I'll just dedicate to finish this part of the book. And then I'll probably end it then, because it'll be at least 2 hours at that point. Most people won't stick around that long. Okay, and then I can always come back. I'll just come right back. I just want to keep it for people re-listening. All right, shut up so you don't waste time. All right, Virginia. Virginia. Virginia was the site of England's first permanent American town, Jamestown, which is founded in 1607. One of Jamestown's leaders was Captain John Smith, whose life was saved by the Native American girl Pocahontas in a story that became part of America's lore. Another first occurred in 1619 when the Virginia legislature called the House of Burgesses, the first lawmaking body in the 13 colonies composed of elected representatives, and they met in Jamestown. The College of William and Mary. Oh, I bet we'll see a lot of William and Marys in this part of the story, whereas we had a lot of Harvards before. You know what? I'm tallying. I'm keeping a tally. This is Harvard. Harvard has 5. And then we'll go and see what school comes out on top. Okay, that's just fun. So every time one of them is from Harvard or now William and Mary, you can take a shot. Let's see. The College of William and Mary was established in Williamsburg in 1693. Today, it is the nation's second oldest college, behind only Harvard. And in 1699, Williamsburg became Virginia's capital, which it remained until the end of colonial times. And you can go to, I've actually been here, Williamsburg, Virginia. Like they have those, amusement parks where you can go back in time and you can rent a costume for the day and see people in the stockades and women are churning butter. And then you can walk next door to the shop and buy an ice cream and then keep going. So they're really kind of cool. That I know that area it's very beautiful there. A relatively few colonial Virginians lived in Williamsburg and other towns. However, most were farmers. Its inhabitants grew so much tobacco that Virginia was nicknamed the tobacconized colony. Oh, wow. While many of the colony's settlers lived in log homes and grew their own crops, wealthy Virginians lived in magnificent estates called plantations, where slaves did the work. By 1775, Virginia was far the most populous of the 13 colonies, with 500,000 people, nearly half of them black slaves. Only Massachusetts was and again, I don't know. I just want to state for the record, because when I'm reading this, I just want to say that I have questions. And I asked a question about how many were black slaves, like our country keeps trying to tell us. And there seems to be, like some of the other stories in here, a conflict of answers. So, these are the type of things you just think you take. Why do you have to say black slaves in the book? Is that important? Is it just slaves? Is it black slaves? Did you actually have papers of that slave, black or white? He's black. All right, he's black slaves. That's what I'm saying, okay? I just don't know. I'm just asking questions. Hate me if you want, but only Massachusetts was more rebellious colony than Virginia. So go Massachusetts. Although he wasn't a signer. Virginia patriot Patrick Henry, which we also remember his name, made a famous speech in which he empathetically declared, "Give me liberty or give me death." One of Virginia's 7 signers, Richard Henry Lee, proposed independence in Congress, and another, Thomas Jefferson, wrote the Declaration. So here it's got, again, the people we're going to be listening to. I'm understanding the book now. And here it says, and as I'm reading these, I am reading these because this is the part in the story where the generational sciences shows is real clear here. We're talking about a nomadic generation, a generation that is of coming of age into their middle life at the time of a crisis, exactly what we're having now. And so their ages is important. This is the age of rebellion here. This is where we finally say, leave me the fuck alone, Dad, if we didn't manage to get to say it in our adolescence. So coming your middle age behavioral cycle is valuable when it's happening during a crisis. So you must remember the normal ways the brain thinks of the world at 45, and then put it in the middle of a crisis. And then you have this overlap of the generational cycles of, prophet, nomad, hero, artist, prophet, nomad, hero, artist. And they were a nomadic generation, the same age as we are, because I still think the Lucy Juicy delayed us. They delayed this crisis past the 2020 mark. I've written this in my work on purpose, because they didn't want the nomadic generation to rebel like they have always done every 100 years. They needed us too old and too sick to actually make a difference. If you notice, we're all too old and too sick to do anything. And that's an intentional act. So I want to note that here as I'm reading their dates and how old they were when this was going on. So first is Richard Henry Lee. He was born somewhere, it says probably in January of 1733. We really don't know, but he was probably about 43 years old. He was married to Anne Anne Pinkard. And they had 9 children. He died June 19th, 1794, somewhere around 61. Francis Lightfoot Lee was born October 14th of 1737. He was about 41 years old. He was married to Rebecca Taylor. They had no children, and he died early 1797 at age 62. There, you see what I'm saying? This is so crazy. George Reith. I just think to myself, did he know that? I wish I could ask Neil, or who is it left? Is it it's not Howe, it's Strauss. Strauss is still alive. I would love to ask him, did you know that? Did you know the age that we would be in had you put this together? Is that why business has delayed our rebellion? I'm just asking. I wonder if they knew, if they realized what they had found, if it was an accident and I'm just one of the few people that go shit. Or if they literally intentionally did that. I don't know. Anyway, George Wythe, he was born in 1726. He was about 50. He was married to Anne Lewis and Elizabeth Taliaferro. I don't know how to say her last name. Taliaferro. Taliaferro, but it's all one word. They had 1 child. He died June 8th, 1806, about 80 years old. Thomas Jefferson, born April 13th of 1743. He was at signing, guess, 33 years old. Martha Skeleton was his wife. They had 6 children. He died again on July 4th of 1826 at 83 years old, making him the twin. Thomas Nelson, born December 26th of 1738. He was 37 years old. He was married to Lucy Grimes, who was 13. I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. That's I gotcha. No, they had 13 children. January 4th of 1789, about 50 years old. Carter Braxton, born September 10th of 1736. He was 39 at the signing. He was married to Judith Robinson and Elizabeth Corbin, and they had 18 children between the 2 women. And October 10th of 1797, he said goodbye, and he died at 61. And then Benjamin Harrison was born in 1726. He was about 50 when he signed. His wife was Elizabeth Bassett, and they had 7 children. And he died April 24th of 1791 at about 68 years old. And this is Virginia. All right. This is fun. Okay, let me see. Okay, you guys are right there. I'll make sure that the chat stays up with the replay, because I think that's important that your comments are also shared. Thank you, Ulick, for the link to Husinistic. I think I assumed not to know. No, see, that's because this is an invite only eternal. No, they can't. That's an excellent way to put it. Jesus. Charming and you, like, I swear to God, you two are just crack me up. I think he's saying he gives that a thumbs down, Charming. he wasn't a fan of your work today. Oh, okay, that's hilarious. I think it's a coming time. Hi, Turning Guns. You're here. Do you hear what I'm saying? I'm so, because I love that I'm not, things are fishy and sketchy and not adding up. I declare the truth. I don't know. I'm going to become the new Samuel Adams. Throw it into the bay. Okay. Richard Henry Lee, free and independent states is his quote. That's what he's known for. He looks, they all have like very large noses. I don't know if they do that on purpose or what, but when you see these pictures, they have like, they honestly, every one of them, huge noses. Like it's just protruding out there. It's either flat and fat or long and thin. It's just weird. Large all together and rosy for some always reason. I always then want to say that if I saw them in real life. All right. We're on. Richard Henry Lee and William and Mary College. Okay. Virginia had the only pair of brothers who signed the Declaration. The older of the two had the honor of proposing that Congress declare independence. It's the twin. It's like the Weasleys. Richard Henry Lee, the seventh of 11 children, was born in. Do you like the numbers? That's why I'm reading them. The seventh of the 11th children was born in Virginia's Westmoreland County. Some authorities, you know how I'm going to do this? Fuck. Because this just made me feel like I was reading a fairy tale for a second because of the names and the numbers and the cartoonish look on him. I feel like I'm reading like a fairy tale about princesses and stuff. So I'm going to change the way I'm reading this since I just started. And this is how I'm going to pretend that you guys are a bunch of little girls. A 7-year-old girl, and I'm going to read this to you as if I'm telling you a story. Let's see if it changes the way it sounds. Okay. Richard Henry Lee, free and independent states. Virginia had the only pair of brothers who signed the Declaration. The older of the two had the honor of proposing that Congress declare independence. Richard Henry Lee, the seventh of 11 children, was born in Virginia's Westmoreland County. Some authorities say he was born in 1732, but the Lee family Bible reveals that his birth date was more likely in January of 1733. Not a 32, but a 33. His family had the old schoolhouse on their estate where tutors taught the children. At age 11, Richard Henry was sent to England. For 7 years, he studied in the mother country and he traveled through Europe for a few months before returning home. When he was 18. Ooh! The Lee family was so rich that Richard Henry didn't need to get a job. Just a few years, he whiled away his time reading and attending parties at neighborhooding plantations. Neighboring. It doesn't have a hood in there. Neighboring plantations. In his mid-20s, he'd married Anne Allett. The couple had 4 children and established an estate, Chantilly, on the Potomac River. The year 1768, it was disastrous for Richard Henry Lee and his family. That spring, he blew off 4 fingers in a hunting accident, and in December, his wife died. Richard Henry Lee later married Anne Pinkard, with whom he'd had another 5 children. Oh my. It's slower to read it that way. But it does read like that, doesn't it? I'm not very good at it. I wish I was very good at it. But I just don't participate like I did. But in my younger years, I loved storytelling events. And what I mean by that is in the world of nerdness that is Joanie would go to like parks and local museums and the library and bookstores, and I would listen to people telling stories, either dressed up in a costume and telling me fairy tales or stories, or I loved the reenactment. I loved going to the museums and listening to the one that comes to my mind when I was probably like maybe 6 or 7, and we got into one, and it was like the lady was showing you how they spun the wheel, and she's spinning the yarn from the sheep. I'm sure it was like a farm or some museum or something. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, this woman is telling me a fairy tale. This is from all the books I'm reading of the spinning wheel and the whole 9 yards. It just seemed, and she's in the dress and she's got the bonnet, and so I've always been massively obsessed with that kind of stuff. I love storytelling, which is why I like reading out loud. So there's just a waste of 5 minutes just to go back in time and have a moment of memories, because I am human and that's what we do. And so I wish I could have read that like really super cool. Like if I could find one to read it to me like that, like I'm listening to one of those really good storytellers. The truth is that I'm a writer, not a storyteller. I'm not an actor. That's not me. But I like to write the stories, and it reminds me, because in our history, that storyteller, that guy that shows up in town, and that barber that retells the same political story or the same thing he read in a magazine or the same thing he heard on the news, or all of those ideas, the cobbler that comes to your house, or the guy that runs through selling his pots and pans a couple of times a year, like they show in the Little House series. Those people, the guys that went around and told stories of Robin Hood, the Pied Piper, even, these people, that's the Gandalfs, and they would go town to town, and they could be nefarious, and they could be really bad people who are spreading, misinformation, as I'm so much, plagued with, supposedly I do. And, or, they were beloved and dear. So, but the best ones, the ones that everyone loved, the Jesuses, because this is Jesus, is the ones that you invited into their home, right? That's Pied Piper stuff. That they didn't have to, they weren't, there's two types of travelers. Like there's those that come into town and rent a hotel room and sell you elixirs out of the back of their wagon. And then there are those that come into town and with a bonfire and, stone soup weaves a tale for you. And they don't have to pay a thing. They get to stay there for free. They're fed for free. The women mend and wash their clothes for free. They can get drunk for free. They're there for free. And that's the true storyteller. And then just think about that on what's going on today. And if that doesn't blow your fucking mind, or if you're already like, oh, you're either going, what the fuck, Joanie, that's mind blowing, or you're going, right? Exactly how simple it was done. I see it now, or we see it. Because I'm not the only one that knows these things. Like I love the storyteller. So anyway, that's just totally, it's on target though, because it is what's going on. And I'm reading this. This is happening again. I've read this in a fairy tale. I've had it read to me. I don't even know what to believe. Were they black slaves or regular slaves? Did he say, that's my big dick on the paper? Did he really challenge him to a duel? I mean, all these stories, I don't know. Samuel Adams, did you? Didn't you? Paul Revere, did you? Didn't you? I don't know. Pocahontas. Come on. What am I listening to? These are fables. I think I like Middle Earth better. But somebody likes politics. Somebody likes this part of the library. They like these kind of stories. They don't want to hear about fairies. So I get it. So they have to be there. The big meaning of life says that I have to have stories. And some people are attracted to science fiction. Some like, fairy tales, and some like politics, and some like mysteries. And I guess I'm one of them because I like all of it. I don't know. But just crazy. It's just crazy. What a mind fuck. Okay. My brain is coming back. I'm coming back now. I'm sure you guys are saying all kinds of things. So we're just kind of looking out into nowhere. As I was, thinking my thoughts out loud. And did you? Almost flipped your. About the stone soup, a story that has always stuck with me about interlopers and carpetbaggers. You should come up and have a conversation with me. Where am I at? I'm at 30 minutes. Okay. Yeah, I'm not doing so good because I really got sidetracked there. All right. We'll just keep going. We got 30 minutes. Okay. So we're learning about Richard Henry Lee. Let's see. I'm not going to read it like that anymore, although that was fun. Thank you for participating with me. Okay. All right. Lee was one of the first Virginia lawmakers to favor independence. And when Britain closed the port of Boston as punishment for the Boston Tea Party, Lee was one of the Virginia leaders who decided to spend June 1st, 1774, the day the port closing began, in prayer and fasting. Oh, that was nice of him. An attack on Massachusetts was an attack on all 13 colonies, Lee insisted. This was a major step in uniting the colonies against England. In 1774, Richard Henry Lee was sent to the Continental Congress, where he served for about 5 years, not counting interruptions. He was one of the best speakers in Congress. His great moment came June 7, 1776, when he made the historic proposal, quote, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, end quote. Ironically, perhaps because of a family illness, Lee had to return home. Ironically, It even says there, perhaps because of a family illness. Lee had to return home and missed July because of, so they're just guessing, perhaps. So there's no, I mean, if his dad died like the next day or his wife or his kid, that would have been known. They would have said because his son had passed away or was injured. But it just says perhaps because of a family illness. Now, I don't know. I've been watching way too many of those, BBC remakes of the kings and queens of this time period, of the 17s and 18s, and I've seen them use that as an excuse in those films for things like their wife has gone psycho, or their horse fell ill, or maybe they had a hunting trip to go to. Always seems something, ironically, perhaps because of a family illness. Like he just gets a letter, come quick, but we don't know. He just gets off. I'm just saying, what are you telling me? Lee had to return home and he missed the July 2nd vote for his own proposal. How ironic. However, he returned in late August and signed the famous document. Now I'm thinking, okay, maybe he wasn't drawn away. Maybe he just came up with it, because not only did he propose it, but he didn't vote on it. And in politics, that means that I'm on a fulcrum. I haven't quite chose a side yet. And maybe that's why he had himself called away. My horse is ill, I must go. My butler has slipped in some mud. Something like that, just so he's not there, so that he has some kind of deniability. Well, I had changed my mind. That was silly what I said, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it could be either of these things. I actually have no idea which one it is. And my confirmation bias is the one that's going to lend me to the side that I take. And I don't think I have confirmation bias. I think I've officially pretty much cleansed myself of that ailment, as much as possible. Because I seem to always get stuck in these two conflicting, like I can see it from this point of view, but I can also see it from that point of view. I mean, it could be this way, but it could also have been that way. And so which way was it? I don't know. Nobody tells me. It's just allegedly. But the next year, Richard Henry Lee failed to get enough votes in Virginia to retain his seat in the Continental Congress. But a month later, he was elected to fill a vacancy in Virginia's congressional delegation. And from late 1784 to late 1785, Lee was president of Congress. This made him, in effect, president of the United States, although, of course, George Washington, who was the first U.S. president under U.S. Constitution, is considered the first president to hold the nation's highest office as we know it today. Then in 1789, Richard Henry Lee was elected as one of Virginia's first two U.S. senators. He served until 1792, when he resigned because of illness and injuries suffered in a carriage accident. It was like a plane crash. Richard Henry Lee died at his home, Chantley, in his early 60s. So that's interesting. So that's interesting. So for a minute, he was in effect president of the United States, which was because he was over the Continental Congress. Okay. That's very interesting. It was a Ferrari. That's it. All right. Francis Lightpool Lee, the quiet brother. So this is the two brothers. It was said that in his quiet way, Francis Lightfoot Lee was even more strongly for independence than his older brother. Soon after his birth in Virginia's Westmoreland County in 1734, his family moved to an estate called Stratford, where he grew up. Francis Lightfoot Lee was very wealthy, but his early life was sad. By his middle teens, he had lost both of his parents. Francis Lightfoot Lee was elected to Virginia's House of Burgesses in 1758, the same year as his brother Richard Henry. When Francis Lightfoot took his seat, he was one of 5 Lees in the House. Wow, there were 5 Lees in the House? That's like a full house. What is that? How can you have that? It's like a full house, right? And if I have 5 Lees, and isn't that right? 3 and 2, I don't know. 5 of them? Why is that important? I don't know why. I just figured I saw cards, but I did. It makes me think of that, a full house there. The couple had no children, but helped raise 2 of their nieces. Oh, I forgot to mention this part. It says in 1769, Francis Lightfoot Lee married another cousin, Rebecca Taylor. So that was his cousin. And the couple had no children, but they helped to raise their nieces. In 1775, Francis Lightfoot Lee was sent to the Continental Congress, where he once again joined his older brother, Richard Henry. The brothers were opposites in many ways. A captivating speaker, Richard Henry Lee was often the center of attention in Congress. Francis Lightfoot Lee preferred to stay in the background, working quietly on congressional committees. As a member of the Board of War, he played a vital role in obtaining supplies for the American Army. On July 2nd, 1776, Francis Lightfoot Lee cast his vote in favor of his brother's independence proposal, then signed the Declaration into August. The Lee brothers usually stuck together. When Richard Henry was outside from the Virginia delegation in Congress in 1777, Francis Lightfoot gave up his seat in protest. Only after his protest helped reinstate his brother in the Virginia delegation did Francis Lightfoot return to Congress. Interesting. Later, the brothers resigned from Congress on the same day, May 15th of 1779. However, Richard Henry later returned to Congress, and he was elected its president. Francis Lightfoot served briefly in the new Virginia state legislature and then retired from public life. A rare time that the Lee brothers disagreed occurred in 1787 over the U.S. Constitution. Oh, did it now? So they're telling me up until this point that these two were like thick, right? They were tight, like fingers crossed, tight buds. But they had some kind of disagreement here about the Constitution itself. That's very interesting. One of the rare times that the Lee brothers disagreed occurred in 1787 over the U.S. Constitution. That's a decade later. Richard Henry opposed the new governmental framework for the nation, while Francis Lightfoot favored it. Virginia followed Francis Lightfoot's recommendation, approving the Constitution on June 25th of 1789. That's when they were doing their biggie thing. That day, Virginia became the 10th state, right? Okay. So that's the day Virginia became our 10th state. Very interesting. The shy signer who had quietly worked for independence, he died in 1797 at the age of 62. Leesburg, Virginia was named in honor of the state's renowned Lee family. And it's got like 6 of them here, 6 Lees in the family, all with their own unique little facial expressions. That's very interesting. One has, his fingers like they're sliding into his coat, his 3 fingers. That's very interesting. I mean, it's just the artist's interpretation, but nonetheless. Okay, I got enough time for one more. Hello, Duck. Stratford is the home of the biggest con of all, Shakespeare. Interesting. Yeah, a poker of 5. Okay, I wasn't off then for that image to pop in my brain. You know, I thought, why am I thinking? I'm trying to think of it out. So I'm glad I wasn't so off there. I think there's a town in New Mexico called Shakespeare where they have festivals of his plays every year. A duck is here. Quack, quack. Hey, duck. It's just a duck. Okay. George Wythe. And then I'm gonna end this one. George Wythe. W-Y-T-H-E. Wythe. Like wife. Like wife. It says the teacher of presidents. That's just what it says. George Wythe. Teacher of presidents. He also has no hair and a big nose in this image. Although often overlooked today, in his own time, George Wythe was the most respected of the 27 signers who were lawyers. We got a lawyer. All right, let's keep a lawyer tally. So far no William and Marys, but I do have lawyer. So I'm going to put lawyer. And every time one of them is a lawyer, we'll put a mark. I'm sure, you know, but so far, that's the first time we've seen this. Let's see. Wythe was born in 1726 near Hampton, Virginia. His father died when George was 3, in an age when girls genuinely had little, if any, schooling. George's mother was highly educated and taught him from home. At 16, George began to study law with his uncle, and at 20, he passed the attorney's test. The next year, he married Anne Lewis, who died 8 months after their wedding. Later, he married Elizabeth Taliaferro. Taliaferro, with whom he had one child who didn't survive infancy. George Wythe won fame for his legal skills and honesty. He wouldn't take a case if he felt his client was in the wrong. And if he caught a client lying, he dropped the case and returned any fees he had been paid. Some people even poked fun of him because he preferred to lose a case than bend the truth. Interesting. Wythe, is he like the only honest lawyer? Is that what I'm reading here? Wythe was elected to the House of Burgesses in 1754 and as mayor of Williamsburg in 1768. He also taught law, eventually becoming a professor at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. That's where he was teaching. His pupils included 2 future presidents, Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe. And the childless Wythe sometimes paid for schooling of needy law students and took them into his home to live. Thomas Jefferson, who had lost his father when he was just 14, called Wythe, quote, my second father. During the troubles with England, George Wythe's influence helped draw Virginia towards independence. He was elected to the Continental Congress in 1775, but was at home in Virginia when independence was approved on July 2nd, 1776. Either someone signed the Declaration for him in his absence, or he signed himself after returning to Congress around September 14th. So there's no way he could have been there, is what they're saying. He served in Congress for a few more months and then returned home to revise Virginia's laws with the help of his ex-student Thomas Jefferson. In 1788, Wythe was elected to serve in this convention in Richmond that considered rather to approve the U.S. Constitution. Wythe helped sway enough delegates, some of whom were his former students, for Virginia to narrowly get its approval and become the 10th. That is nuts. Okay, just in itself, what a fascinating story. I mean, think of that. To fill and get your seat, pick your jury. Passed. It's a 10th state. Wythe had grown to hate slavery, and after his second wife Elizabeth died in the late 1780s, he freed some of his slaves. What? He'd grown to hate it, and after his wife died, he freed some of his slaves. Okay, that sounds like he freed his wife's slaves, the ones that he didn't need anymore. He didn't need 20 of them. Why am I keeping him around? I don't have anything else for them to do. My wife isn't here. After his second wife, Elizabeth, died in the 1780s, he freed some of his slaves. That's what that means. Translation: he fired all of his wives' slaves. What do you mean free? Did he give him any money to leave? Did he hand him a few bucks to at least, or did he just open the door and go, get out? You're freed now. Run. I don't want to catch you trespassing and have to shoot you or something. We'll never know how many licks it takes to get to the Tootsie Roll Center. Okay. In his old age, he lived with his two former slaves, his housekeeper, Lydia Broadnax, and a youth named Michael Brown. Wythe was very fond of Michael and named him to inherit part of his estate. Also in the household was George Wythe Sweeney, the signer's great nephew. And Sweeney, who was in line to inherit most of Wythe's estate, ran up gambling debts. So there must have been some type of black and white irritation going on if they were talking about black slaves. But I don't think we are. Let's just look at the names. Lydia Broadnax. Would that be Michael Brown? Are these, it doesn't say black slaves like it does earlier in the book. I'm not saying they weren't. I'm just asking, were they? Because if they were two black slaves, as I'm led to assume, then this just opened a story for me between Michael Brown and who was it? The great nephew Sweeney, who both of these two were set to inherit half the estate. That sounds like a yin-yang thing. So I'm saying that's very interesting. Okay. First, he forged his uncle's name. So let me start here. Wythe was very fond of Michael and named him to inherit part of his estate. Also in the household was George Wythe Sweeney, the signer's great nephew. Sweeney, who was in line to inherit most of Wythe's estate, ran up gambling debts. First, he forged his uncle's names on checks. Then, to get the whole estate, he poured poison into the coffee that George Wythe, Michael Brown, and Lydia were drinking. Wow, he's poisoning them. The signer and young Brown died, but Lydia, although gravely ill, survived. Holy crap. There was plenty of evidence against Sweeney, but by Virginia law, blacks couldn't testify against. He was black, everybody. Whites in court, so Lydia wasn't heard. And Sweeney was found not guilty of murder. Wow. George Wythe, the signer who was dear to Thomas Jefferson and so many others, was about 80 years old when he was murdered in 1806. Who knew our 13 days of independence was going to come with some murder? That's fantastic. Okay, and that's it. That's me. 2 hours. I'll come back with Thomas Jefferson. All men are created equal later. I don't know when later because, I want to do some other things. And then dinner is happening. But thanks for listening to me read for a couple hours. I think I can do that. I'll keep going through it as I can until I either get sick of reading them But now I'm intrigued. I want to know how the story ends. I've got murders. I've got cousins marrying. I've got 5 brothers as infiltrators into the, I got a mafia in the Congress. I don't know. This is getting good. So anyway, very good questions. Great questions. So let me go to, you guys, see what you're saying as we go out here. Just mind your hands, Jerry. That lawyer sounds like a righteous man, a sense of morality that is unheard of. He was murdered for it. Was it? Well, we can look further into him. That's an interesting story. Joanie's burst in bubbles. Did you enjoy that? I do appreciate that, a good handful of people really find that stuff as interesting as I do. And, I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to read it aloud, which I would read anyway, but I do enjoy reading aloud and being read to. And so it'd be like if y'all came over and, watched me, I don't know, crochet like I'm doing it. Would you like to come watch? Where do they sleep and who feeds them? Right. And I read a lot of that. I have read a lot of that. Like there's actually one of these guys in another book that I read about our founding fathers, because that's kind of what I've been focusing on here. I read another of them said that the slaves were free anyway, really, but he made a decree that they were free and they stayed. They wanted to stay. Now I then asked myself, because you can't just take that at face value. What does that mean? Obviously, then first you think, oh, well, that was nice. They really liked each other and they formed a family and they made a bond and a group. And maybe that was the case, as it sounds like in this situation. But at the same time, it would be hard to break the role of being a servant and a carer for someone, even if they took care of you and just become their friend. So I have to add just human thought. So now is it that, are they still taking care of them, but maybe not without the urgency? Maybe they're allowed to do it, like driving Miss Daisy style. Or are they now paid instead? Are they now official? You're not a slave. The slave means I'm working for free. But what if you stay and I pay you something and I give you Sundays off and you can go into town? Maybe what if I offer to do something for you? What if, WikiHow, how to control people, give them things. That's just another form of control, even if it's consensual. So when they tell me these stories that they freed their slaves, either they told, bye, get out, you're free now. They either were douchey like that, ran them off, or they handed them $50 and said, thanks, see yourself out. Or they offered them money to stay, or they did form a family. But I just can't, even if they did, maybe then I could allow, well, but I like taking care of them, because as a female, I like taking care of the people in my house. I get a sense of of joy and belonging when I do that. So even though at times I do it begrudgingly, that's few. Most of the time I enjoy it. I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it. I'd throw something in the microwave. So I can see there still be an exchange, but there would still be an exchange, right? They're not going to be sitting next to you. Maybe it's just, would you like some more wine? But I'm enjoying the wine with you, but I'm the one pouring it. because I can't stop my human instinct to take care of you. I can't prevent myself from always being a caretaker. My daughter can move off to another planet and I will still have the instinct to care. So, I guess that's all right. I don't have a problem with that, but we need to define what that means. We need to ultimately define what a freedom even means, because currently I am free. I'm free to do whatever the fuck I want. So are you, or you would be here. We are free. What we're fighting for is that we're seeing people that aren't free, and we see them trying to make that here. I'm seeing countries like China or communist countries or just name them. It doesn't matter. It seems like they want more of that here than we had before. I see it now. Okay. It was over there and I didn't notice, and it was Hollywood, but now you're trying to do it here. And so, it's hard not to notice. And I couldn't help but thinking that too when I was reading that. The idea of how small, Massachusetts was, and yet by today's standards, it itself, it was, that would have been large, but at the time that would have been a small town. I mean a large town, right? We would see that as nothing. And so if we were thinking about trying to get a small town today with that many people in it to all vote on that would be a lot easier. I'm saying that they could have got this Constitution through a lot easier. That would be nearly impossible today. We can't even get people to agree on whether they want Coke or Pepsi. And you're expecting me to believe that I'm going to get that many people to all come together. It's insanity. But that is kind of what's necessary. 250 years and all. Hey, Joe Cool. Let's see what Joe knows. Joe knows what a slave is. Slave is when you are not allowed to not participate. Right. Where I don't have the choice to tell you, get it yourself. Is that what you're saying, Joe? When asked, can you get me a glass of wine? I'm a slave. If I can't say to you without retribution, get it your fucking self. Well, maybe not like that. I could just say jokingly, oh, I'd love another glass. Will you get me one as well? If it's not a trade-off. I see see, to me, Joe, that's more of mental tactics. That's where I would label that. What if the slaves migrate north and the northerners do not want them? Is that the Civil War? Slaves get room and board. Maybe free slaves get their own new separate shack on the property somewhere with a stipend for keeping an eye on the elderly and overseeing the property. I would say that was probably the case more often. So again, I have to be careful when I'm reading these books, because when I'm listening right now, especially right now with racism and blacks and Democrats and the whole 9 yards and corn pops and hairy legs, they're selling me a narrative of black and white. They want that happening. And when I go back and I read these stories, this is what they sell me in order to keep that illusion alive. They say to me, Thomas Jefferson had 10 slaves, but was against slavery, right? And what were they defining as a slave? And what exactly are we talking about? And are you using that to sell, to try to trigger the racism button that lives inside me? He let 3 of them go. Is that how, what is that one news channel? Oh man, it's got that lady. They're always doing green movement, truths and they're always out there. Even the Young Turks would be in that same, but I can't think of the name of the channel. But anyway, that's like something that they would do, where they twist the narrative. Just, they don't pinch it off. They just take it and they twist it in one screw, one turn, so that when you read it, your confirmation bias is there, as opposed to if they'd given it to you in its entirety, you know? And I'm saying, okay, here's a question. Maybe someone can ask this. I need to know. I just want to know. Was a slave, why was the term slavery used? Like, what was the underlining definition of that? Because again, I've already learned that a person is also a business. So the definition of these words, I need to know what they mean when they're being used, because slaves are something that were tallied on a piece of paper at a port. It's a business. Slaves is a business term. It's a product. So even if my slaves live happily on my property and are very well taken care of, but I'm a rich person, I still may label them for my taxes or whatever as a slave, right? Maybe there's something to that, just like they do today. The same exact crap. Do you have a dependent? It used to be called a slave tax. Now it's called a dependent tax. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm just asking questions. I don't know. I do not know what I'm talking about. But these are the questions that people who don't know what they're talking about are asking. So I would like answers to those. That would be fabulous. Okay. Well, look after your slaves now. The government is occupied by lazy ass bastards who do not want to work. I don't know what that first word is. Said that the state is that great fiction where everyone believes they can live off the taxes of others. Oh my God, that sounds like a pyramid scheme. That sounds like the definition of a pyramid scheme. I keep thinking that I can live off of someone else's, buying in to my soda or my mineral water or my face cream. My knives. Like, being a young adult in the 90s and to early 2000s, everybody sold fucking something. There was, we're going back because we had the Avon and Mary Kay and Tupperware and that. But by the time the 80s kicked in, 90s brought in a lucrative business, and we got tons of at-home businesses for women. Tons of them, from books to food to pocketbooks to home decor. These direct sales companies were getting these women that, for extra income, for stay-at-home moms, for enough money to treat yourself to Disney once a year. These were actually what was going on. And that's what they were. I'm only going to make money if I'm a first director or the first salesman. My money only comes from those underneath me. And if I can't get anyone to sign up underneath me, then it doesn't fucking matter how much cream I sell. I'm still only going to be limited by how many parties I can do, right? So the idea is to create a downline, convince other young women that the product is something that they want. Most consultants for these types of home-based companies, most of them sign up to get the discount. That's the original attraction to it in the first place, to get the discount, their own personal discount, and then to sell to their friends. That's what they all want. And so it is beautiful. Same thing, pyramid scheme, for sure. For sure. What do you get when you cross a tax collector with a prostitute? A government employee. It's all marketing. It's the class system, Joanie. Yes. Yes, great questions. They are the history revisers and always looking for fractured lines to agitate and take advantage of modern people's laziness, jealousies, and resentments. Their confirmation bias, their assumptions eternal. Everyone is an ass. You're either an ass's ass or an elephant's ass. Which ass? I heard that it comes from Slav. Slav. Oh, what's that? Is that Slavic? What are you saying there? Don't make me look like an idiot duck. Help me out here. I need make it sound like when I'm reading it, I can go, oh yeah, huh? Gotta get I don't want to have to stop and act stupid for a minute. What does that mean? This from a Slav, funnily enough. Again. Oh, but charming comes in. Hang on, charming comes in. My understanding is the reverse. The Slavic label came from the fact that they were previous Caucasian slaves who escaped. Oh, okay. I don't know. You guys are going to have to clarify that. Because I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. Oh, you do. Okay. All right. So slave came from Slavic and the Slavic people, which were the Caucasians. I think that's, yeah. That's why I had asked that when it says slaves in America, where they count. See, another assumption that we make. They have drilled in my mind that black slaves, black equals slave, slave equals black. So that when I see a black person, I think slave and then, or slavery. And when I see slavery, I think black people. That's what they have done. That's the mind fuck right there. Now, I happen to come from a family with different understanding. And so, something I learned early on when it came to my attention that, just in my own family tree, that Irish were slaves. So just them. I'm not even saying them specifically. I'm just saying there's another one. There's another group of people that were brought over here, given the label as a slave. And there were a lot of them. And so I don't know where we're getting these ideas. And, they say things like, they use these terms, servants, indentured servants, or you're going to pay off. I mean, the same thing that was happening now was happening then. We cannot be that stupid that we honestly, every time we hear the word slave, we have to add it to, a bunch of black, scrawny or muscly men, gathered off of giant muscle men, just snatched off the beaches in Africa or snatched out of the jungle and then brought over here, and they couldn't have just taken, I don't know, the stories that that they try to show me just don't seem to match. It just doesn't seem to match. It doesn't always make sense to me. It seems like something that if I was watching the movie, I would go, why doesn't he just punch him in the face? He's way bigger. And there's like 10 of them, it just brings these ideas of, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. And you've given me this and you've said, okay, assume what you want. And I happen to know that the devil likes assumption, narcissism. So narcissism as a disease, that's psychopaths, sociopaths, any kind of cluster B personality. It's got an instinct of assumptions, con men, that puts con men, magicians, thieves, all of the bad stuff. Its number one rule is off assumptions. That's what magic is. Magic is allowing the other person to assume something that isn't true, period. That sleight of hand. So they love when we assume things. So if they're telling me racism, transhumanism, rainbow, they are telling me what they want me to assume a little at a time. And I do get irritated at my friends sometimes. And I know I allow most of my friends, but let's talk about outside when we're in groups where the chat is the average human being's thought process. Their comments mimic the language they're being told to use. From Jews to transgender to he, she, to, red pilled, even the amount of times I hear red pilled, they're red pill, and they've turned it into a verb, being red pilled. Should be a huge flag anytime that is used. Anytime someone is using that language, red pilled, they have yet to be pilled. They're still taking pills. Do you see what I'm saying? If you say the word red pilled and you're not doing it in an environment where we also say, like, bring your receipts and that's rad to describe something, you're using that as your vernacular in a way, you are still being pilled, drugged. You're still being drugged. That's how I'm going to say that. And now I'm ending this. So don't talk to me anymore. Because you know what happens, and I start having more thoughts and more thoughts. Okay. To mean glory to Ukraine. Okay. Garbling it. What you might assume. That's true. Because if they believe it, it would fit with their love turning everybody upside down. Their love of, if they made something glorious, such as the nobility of the human spirit, come to mean slave to material. Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% loving that comment. In the anarchy, ignorance of the law is the best excuse. I didn't know. The widespread push that gives it away. Well, you can't have an opinion like that. You can't have an opinion if you're not there to vote. You can lie between. And that's what I think ignorance is. Choosing to stay ignorant is one thing. And I think that's why we have things like, growing into adulthood. Because if I choose to stay in a childish state, I can't be blamed for things I just didn't bother to know, which honestly makes us like really taking a gamble. Because I want to know. I must look. I am a Sarah. Okay. Lot is running. I am looking and I'm taking notes. And I'm okay with being turned into a pillar of salt. At least I can tell you when it happened and what happened. Whereas all Lot can do is keep running and come up with crazy stories about how God was angry with people. Do you see what I mean? I don't know. 300 yourself. A slave to the community, a Slav. The term is used to identify the unity of a common original tribe. Excellent. Okay. All right. We'll bounce out just for prosperity purposes because it remind ourselves. So public service announcement, everyone. Remember, no contact is the road to freedom. Goodbye.
This public service announcement is brought to you by Rotten Studios. Remember, no contact is the road to freedom.